Hi, welcome. I'm Knut. I'm a DevRel at Santi.io, and today I have Ronald with me, and we are going to talk about content modeling and structured content and how to get started, reason about it, and just start building better content models, basically. So, Ronald, who are you? Where are you? And what have you done this last 10 years or 20 years or whatever?
Hi, Knut. My name is Ronald Aveling. I am in Tasmania on the tiny island off the end of Australia at 42 degrees south latitude. My background, I've been working in the web for a long time, over 10 years. I guess I'm kind of a content and UX designer these days. I do a lot of stuff for websites and e-commerce, stuff like that. I run a small agency with my friend Bobby, and we're fully remote. So yeah, I've worked in CMSs for a long time, and I came to Sanity after being pretty frustrated with built-in bias, things like that, turning a blog into an e-commerce platform or something like that. So yeah, it's a little bit about my background. Over to you, Newt.
So content modeling. Let's start. What is even content modeling? What's that?
Well, I think generally speaking, it's really a process of kind of working out the kind of content you need for your project or your business, and find intelligent and sustainable ways to structure it. So, the outcome of content modeling is typically a content model, which, represents a kind of a shared understanding of your business or the subject, and, as it relates to your customers and users. So the process of modeling is usually a group process. Typically involves more people than just yourself, unless you are, the subject matter expert on whatever it is that you're doing. So you may be working, if you're a developer, for example, you might be working with authors, subject matter experts. Perhaps you're doing a website or a project on medical stuff. You may be working with other developers, information architects, designers even, and other stakeholders, perhaps, people in the executive level of your business or anything like that. So really that model is a kind of a culmination, a representation of all of those things, all of those needs that come together in something that's sensible that you can then use, hopefully, for a long time and iterate and improve as you go along.
So I thought you only needed posts and pages and stuff and categories. Rhetorical question.
Well, yes, indeed. I think it depends. I mean, that's an interesting point, because I think historically, certainly, in the world of websites, we have been, the kind of inheritance is often kind of like a monolithic CMS or something like that may have been built for a particular need case. And then, people kind of find workarounds. For example, you might be doing some really custom e-commerce stuff, but the CMS may have been designed as a blog initially, or had some other use. So yeah, posts and pages, things like that are oftentimes kind of coupled to a presentation layer. Like how things look on a website or on your app or something like that. And I think that, as content management systems and content strategy is maturing, we are coming to realize that, it's probably better to have a content first approach and to model your content really about the business needs or the subject domain, and deal with it at that level, at that kind of primal level first, and then let the kind of externalities of the presentation layer and things like that, let those things manifest, deal with them later, basically, because it's easier and more sustainable to do it that way.
Yeah, you kind of introduced this with this. It sounds like an ideal situation where you have people from different departments or technical backgrounds and stuff coming together and figuring out how should this content universe work. And you mentioned that there's content strategists. There are that's a thing.
Yeah, it's a thing. I mean, I guess, it's not necessarily a thing for every business and every application. So, perhaps in a more mature company, bigger organizations, quite often, you know, for small projects, people wear many hats. So it might, you know, a copywriter might be thinking strategically about their content in terms of how, you know, are they writing it in a sustainable way? Are there pieces of content that could be reused elsewhere? You know, yeah. So maybe I'm getting a bit ahead of myself there with the terms like content strategist, but it's certainly thinking strategically about your content is important, no matter who you are. You know, be it a developer or a copywriter or even a business owner. So.
Yeah, and I think it's not perhaps like apparent for everyone that content is that's it can be sustainable. You can like actually think about it as an asset like a valuable thing in a company or organization. But I think you start to notice that when you have to like copy paste the same text across multiple things and keep it updated, and suddenly you are spending a lot of time doing chores for content because it's important to have it like correct. So a content strategy is like sort of thinking about how you can make that a better process and workflow.
Absolutely, absolutely. You know, in the kind of web development space, people talk a lot about technical debt. You know, I think that there is a real content debt is a real thing. You know, you mentioned copy paste several times. You know, I remember some old websites I used to work on where, for example, product pricing was not coupled to a product. It was just typed into a kind of a blob of rich text. And so, you know, on a big website, people can't remember where that price is. And, you know, so you change the price or something's on sale. It's like, you know, well, that's kind of a bit of a crude example, and maybe, but that is a form of debt, you know. And so thinking about your content in intelligent ways can really make a difference, I think, for organizations, especially organizations or businesses that have a really, you know, that content is core to what they do. And obviously now in the web, you know, everybody's online, even the kind of plumbers and hairdressers of the world have some sort of a web presence. And so, you know, if you can think about the content sustainably, it usually pays off in the long run.
Yeah, now we also have, we had said content like probably 80 times already in this like few minutes that we have chatted. What is content actually? That's kind of a curveball, but
yeah, no, it's a great question. I mean, obviously, I think the kind of first impression that one would have is you know, words and writing and stuff like that. You know, perhaps prose and things like that. But really, content, as far as the web is concerned, it's kind of any sort of asset, I guess, would be the way I think about it. That lives somewhere, is kind of lives in your content repository. So it's not exclusive to text. Certainly images and media assets could be part of your content. The way in which those things are not necessarily stored on a server, but the way in which they are organized or situated, and kind of how all of the various data pieces and content pieces fit together. It's all kind of content. So
yeah, and it's like it's not just your marketing material or like the stuff that is on the web page. It's like product descriptions or like biographies for the employees or consultants, all of this like stuff that floats around.
That's right. That's exactly right. I mean, if you think about it that way, the depth and breadth of your content is kind of really all consuming. I mean, you can run, I know with a good enough content management system, you can run your timesheets out of a content store, you know, or a database. So you can think holistically about all these things. You may have a person, you know, who is an employee who has data related to their timesheets, but they also create, you know, content for a website, or they do other things like that. So it's possible to think holistically in that way about content now, you know, given the right tools, of which Sanity, I believe, is one.
Yeah. So if you're now convinced by our like pitch, like think about content more broadly. It's you need to have content models. You need to get started with that. How could you like get started with like content modeling and thinking about content first strategies and stuff like this?
So I think the best way to get inside of content in my experience, is to sort of start pretty light, and usually I like to start in a kind of an analog manner. And I'm thinking here sort of like a new project, a web project. So if you are working from an existing corpus, you know, you're coming into something that's already quite well structured, the needs would be different. But still, I think the early phase for me is really kind of sketching out loose kind of schemas and diagrams about what the major pieces are within a given content model. So, you know, depending on what the needs of that business are. So, you know, post-it notes, things like that, you know, the whiteboards, you can really kind of like hash out the rough sort of landscape really of your content early. And then as you go from there, you can move into different sort of tooling to develop that model. Oftentimes, you know, I think people, a lot of people, one easy way to you know, talk about a model and work through a model is by creating some sort of a schematic. So a diagram could be like a SEM type diagram, which is a bit of a kind of a coding sort of terminology, but really something that just lays out blobs on a page, you know, or on a canvas, and shows how all those pieces connect to one another. So it's about areas and connections. You know, the relationships of the model are probably the most one of the most important aspects.
Also, a pretty familiar, like, basic model for most people would be like the aforementioned blog post, I guess. So you can have a blog post, and you can have authors, and there's a connection between authors and blog posts, and there we have like a basic content model, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely.
But and then you can get more advanced. Perhaps you have, I don't know, products, product categories, vendors, outlets, stuff like that. And all of these things have their own, I guess, properties or like ways of being described. So kind of mapping all of this out in a way is like I guess the exercise.
Absolutely. I think, yeah, that's the key is really mapping the relationships, finding the, you know, the kind of silos or the various kind of high level pieces and how they connect together. A recipe is another, you know, great example, sort of low level way of thinking about content modeling, where you may have a food recipe that is comprised of different information. So a recipe is full of ingredients. So you might have your recipe on one, you know, your recipe here, but the recipe is fed by ingredients. You know, ingredients may have a different type. They may be vegetables or meat. And then there are other layers to that recipe, such as like an instruction layer. You know, you also have cooking time, you know, preparation. So there's a chronology of what you need to do with the recipe. There are ingredients that are involved with the recipe. There's quantities to the ingredients. So all these things kind of, you know, all those relationships kind of interconnect. And if you think about it and you try to reduce them to their most sort of primitive kind of forms, it gives you a mechanism to expand your kind of content vocabulary over time, or, you know, tinker with it. So yeah, it's fun stuff.
I guess. Yeah, it is. And like doing these exercises is like very interesting because they also tend to tease out things about your business or what you are doing. It's like it's telling something about that. This is a hard question, I guess, but like if you start to like map out and like if you start to map out all of these things in this way, it's sort of hard not to get into like trying to make a very high fidelity map of the reality, like trying to like get everything like super fine grained and stuff. How do you like keep a sensible abstraction that's also useful?
Yeah, I think that's kind of the art of modeling, I guess. You
That's
know,
where you
in this,
hire a content strategist.
perhaps something like that. I mean, there's, you know, human beings, I think we've been trying to categorize the world and systematize it, you know, since we knew how to do it. So content modeling is just another manifestation of that. I mean, if you think about the way in which, you know, for example, the animal and vegetable kingdoms, and the fungal kingdom. All these things are kind of organized into various sort of trees, of relationships. We've been doing it for a long time. So given the opportunity and time and endless resources, I think human beings would categorize things to the nth degree. But that is not, there is a sweet spot, and it's usually involves not going that far down the garden path of, finite, detailed encapsulation, I guess. So, and that's really where your business needs play a big role in informing the degree to which you categorize and systematize things. So, if you have a simple blog and that's really what your need case is, you don't need to add, layers and layers of trickery. It may be something that you can just get away with a very simple kind of model. But if you're an enterprise level company or whatever, if you have much more complex needs and integrations between various, softwares and platforms and different audiences, then, that degree of categorization, the complexity of relationships can kind of get larger, but justifiably so in that case. So it's kind of horses for courses, I guess. You've got to find the right fit for your needs.
Yeah, the way I tend to think about it is this is also like, will this be practical to work with? Because oftentimes there's actual humans having to do actual work with the fields or whatnot this like model is going to end up in, and that should be like, people can't be like filling out forms all day. They have to like get stuff done as well. So trying also to hit like the level where it's practical to work with, but you keep like that fidelity you need to do whatever. That's like sort of the art. It feels kind of like an art, like a thing you have to like get practiced on.
Yeah, it's definitely an art, and I think that's a great point that you make about user experience there in terms of the content creator or the person who is interacting with your data store. There's a great book by a guy I'm reading at the moment called a man called Mark Baker, his book is called Structured Writing, and he talks a lot about how when you structure content, you can either improve that content person's ability to create meaningful content, or you can detract from it. And there's a real sweet spot there. You want to make sure that the person who's inputting that content is in a flow state, wherever possible, of like getting stuff done, but also creating the right kind of content. Now, that could be marketing copy that's really customer focused, so those people may have a different user interface. Or if it's metadata and very really discrete kind of content, for particular needs, you want to maybe even reduce the scope within that thing, so it's like just a pull down selector that like something where they can't go wrong. So there is an art form to that, and the way in which you structure content and the user experience of populating it has a direct implication on the quality of your content. So you can make it hard, and then the stuff that gets put into that content store maybe not what you want as a result of that. So something to consider for sure.
Yeah, we have touched on it a bit already, but we have this this term structured content. I thought we should like try to explain what that actually is and what it is not. Sort of that might be useful, because we like, as Sanity, we call ourselves the platform for structured content. We probably think that structured content is a good thing that you want, but what's structured content, and why should you care about it? I will ask you. I should have the answer, obviously, but yeah, you are the content strategist there.
Well, I guess the way I think about structured content is really content that is structured in a way that it makes the most meaning and it has the most function relative to the business or the subject matter. So what I think it is not, maybe this is one interesting way to think about it, is it's often so it makes sense unto that and the business model more so than it does the presentation layer of the content. So I think that's an important distinction to make, at least the way I look at it, because when I think structured content should relate unto and of itself and to the business, and in many cases have little or as minimal relationship to the presentation of that content as possible. So basically find a way to make the content work in its own sort of meaningful space, and then secondary to that, deal with the presentation of that content. And so I see structured content as a little bit of a differentiator from kind of page-based or presentation-based ways of thinking about content, because I think that's where it's easy to get kind of hung up and do yourself some harm in the long run. If you're kind of worrying about today's presentation layer when in 2 years' time, or given a different device or something like that, the context changes and you have to undo a bunch of stuff. So hopefully that helps. It's a little bit elliptical, but
yeah, but we can like explore it a bit more, because thinking about content in terms of presentation is something you typically do when you have like inline, what you see is what you get editing, like services like I guess Squarespace or Photoshop or whatever, like where you actually are concerned with how things look, how things are visually presented. It can also be like fiddling around with font sizes in Word. It's like that part of it's sort of content and design work as well, but having the way your content ends up constrained by those visual or presentational concerns is like not structured content in a way.
Yeah, I don't think it helps longevity, you know. And if you think about the history of content, you know, back in the days when it was like the kind of Gutenberg printing press sort of era, writers would write content relative to the meaning of the content. They weren't burdened with considerations about the presentation layer, you know. And then cut to 600, I don't know, 1,000 years later or something, you know, desktop publishing emerged. And so people were given these incredible tools, you know, content creators were given the capability to, you know, make some text italics in red within the middle of a big rich blob. So it sort of, there was a layer of a kind of an additional cognitive layer that content creators were kind of burdened with really as they did that stuff. And I think that sort of changed the role. And so we, in the last, like really since the kind of personal computer desktop publishing era, we have sort of been influenced by what you see is what you get. And I think that now there's a bit of a pull away from that because of reasons related to sustainability and really efficiency and efficacy, because websites change all the time. You know, like if you're a digital first business, your site's going to look different. Your needs are different. If you write a big, long blob of kind of content, you know, that's directly informed by, you know, the presentation layer and striving for fidelity as you write, you've kind of, you've embedded all those decisions into the content. And so later on in a year or two or three, if you want to sort of unpack that, you can't really, you can do it, but it's expensive to do so. So that concept of structured content is really a kind of a differentiator from that way of thinking. It's like, what's the most meaningful way to assemble this content or to store it, but not considering the presentation layer, you know. And because now we have incredible ways to deal with the presentation stuff, you know, we have API based kind of ways to get the content and tons of great front end tooling for websites and apps and things like that. So ideally, yeah, if the structure is there, you can assemble it and compile it and present it in all sorts of great ways that are relevant for now, and then just adjust that later on when you need to, rather than do both things.
Yeah, it's interesting with sort of the trend or like paradigm even with Jamstack, where you actually decouple the different parts of the like website stack that you used to have like a monolithic CMS that held both the data store, the templating and the rendering of the web page and everything like in one neat package. We kind of like now tear that apart to have better things in all places. But then you also decoupled sort of the authoring experience. You like said, no, your content is going to go through APIs now, and we will have this fancy JavaScript framework. We'll render it in like our design system or something. And what's interesting is to see that it seems that this change has taken people that work with content a bit back, like, whoa, there's an abstraction here. It's hard to predict how this markdown thing or this thing that I'm writing in text fields will end up looking like. I don't know how it will actually fit on a page, sort of. And we see all like other vendors now trying to bring back the inline in-page editing stuff and so on. And I guess we have some opinions about that at Sanity HQ, but trying to bridge this authoring experience back to like tying the presentation and or a certain presentation with the content, it's interesting to see that negotiation going on. While if you are a bit like, if you have practiced content modeling and thinking about content more like this thing that you can put in different places, you tend not to like need that as much. Not that it's bad. It's like, it's just about how your mental models is and what practice you have, I guess. But I don't know. Do you feel the inkling to see how your text is going to end up actually?
In some respects, I do. And I can definitely empathize with that position, especially in light of where we've come from the last 20 years through, Microsoft Word and that kind of experience and things like WordPress preview. But there's a quandary there, there's a little bit of a trap. I think that oftentimes if you kind of author content within this kind of assumption that you will get this kind of high fidelity sort of preview experience or something related to the change you just made. I mean, a writer or a content creator, I can understand, wants to see some validation that yes, what they did works, and yes, it's appropriate for their audience. So that's a very valid concern. But in equal measure, I think you can, especially in the kind of multi-device or even like an Internet of Things world, it's almost nearly impossible for a content creator to actually know all the permutations of their content, in a kind of high fidelity preview state, unless they've got some like crazy setup where they can view, multi-browser testing and viewports and stuff like that. So there's a bit of a trap there. There's a little bit of a gotcha where you may create something given a specific finite context, but it actually it doesn't factor in all the considerations. So there's a great argument, I think, in terms of heading back towards the content and heading back towards the structure, and then getting maybe just enough preview, in some respect, that can sort of validate the essentials of your content so that you can create with confidence. So I think you need a little bit, writing in a vacuum can be difficult. And, we all know that, like, if you're writing a headline and that it's going to be in huge font, you're not going to write a 30-word headline or something. So that is a factor. But I think that's that's probably the space that we need to work on the most, is finding the way to get preview sympathetic to the author, but without sort of like taking us all the way down the WYSIWYG path.
Yeah, and I guess since this talk is like hosted by Sanity, I should perhaps mention that you can do this with Sanity. You can have like multiple previews and define them as you want, and so on. But I think I'm like working with a tutorial on how to make like the back end for Alexa voice assistant skill. So this is where your content actually ends up being said aloud, and that's so interesting, because having your content read aloud sets a completely different constraint versus like a visual display of it. And it's so useful because some people are actually dependent on like hearing the content. For us people that are used to like doing this by eyesight, it's not that apparent always that my like big chunk of excerpt isn't that fun to listen to, sort of, or that useful to listen to. So I think like also thinking about previews and stuff in other ways than just like how the website design is an interesting exercise. Also in terms of becoming a better like content person.
That's totally true. That's totally true. I mean, you've raised a great point about, people who don't have their kind of visual faculties or vision impaired. I mean, we literally, the kind of context is just exploding, and so what it was 10 years ago, we have better awareness about accessibility related issues for people who are, vision impaired, for example. But your Alexa example is a great case in point. We just don't really know how and where that content is going to manifest, either not necessarily today, sometimes it's hard to track all the manifestations, but certainly in the future as your business changes. And so really that's where structured content can be so helpful, because if you're working from this place of, sort of essential meaning and essential relationship to the business and the audience, and the subject that you're working with, then those kind of those archetypes are more likely to remain and stick around and still be viable in 10 years or 20 years than the context, the presentation context of today, or in a year's time. So.
Yeah, and I think there's also this like potential that you are making when you like do the structured content thing, because you end up having this like neatly packaged content, and hopefully it's like available through APIs. And we also have like the aforementioned like fancy JavaScript frameworks, like stuff that makes it really easy to consume that. And I would think for like designers and developers, like having this ready and just like use it to experiment and explore and like try out different designs. It sounds like a better way to work than the opposite thing, like having lorem ipsum in cards and figuring out way too late that the names of the people in the company like breaks the design and you have to like redo it. Like doing the content first, it sounds better for everyone. That's
I
the
think so.
statement.
Yeah, I'm a big proponent. I mean, I think
Yeah.
content first is a great way. Even things like, again, mostly I'm coming from a website world, so things like sitemaps. People often kind of obsess over sitemaps and navigation, and that kind of stuff can get a lot easier with a really great content model and content structure. And if you structure your content the right way, there's tons of awesome kind of rule-based and algorithmic approaches that you can have to present your content, where you can A/B test it and stuff like that, and kind of like find the most efficient way of presenting these things. So that's a consideration. Yeah. And the other thing
Yeah.
that's great about, well, sorry, I just remembered a point that I wanted to touch on there. One of the great things about Sanity is that you can establish a prototype and a content model very fast. Like if you know a little bit of JSON and you follow the command line tutorials and things like that, you can get a functioning model. Depending on the complexity, obviously, if you've got a simple model, you can get it working quite quickly. And that gives you, for me, that's like incredibly powerful, because you can stress test that model early on, so you can give your designers something to work with, rather than lorem ipsum. They can, they can start ingesting content into their designs. You can find the edge cases of your fields and things like that. Work with the long headlines, the short headlines, things like that. Really kind of like get some of those critical decisions sorted out early, because they can affect the model. You may want to structure your content differently depending on how those things play out. And so going into a kind of iterative, a living functional prototype that basically generates a graph as well as a database that you can work with, and something that designers can work with early, is, in my opinion, very liberating and extremely valuable.
Yeah, and it's like it's also like oftentimes like fun, or like, because when I have worked in projects where we had structured content, it's so easy to like on a whim just like make a cool Slack bot that uses some of the content for some like useful or like just fun thing. So it also opens for like innovation and exploration like that in unexpected ways.
Definitely. I mean, certainly, my experience with Sanity has been very much like that. It's like, just like, it's a great tool, even if you're not in production, but just like experimenting, having kind of like light bulb moments, quickly workshopping some relationship ideas and things like that. I think it's like incredibly valuable for that. So Yeah, it's good stuff. It's easy to get the creative juices flowing, and I hope that actually people in the content strategy space like myself can find a way into sanity, because it's not, there's a little bit of tech involved. You do have to learn a little bit of JSON to set up your schema, but if you can deal with that, it just opens up a whole world. And I think that people in content strategy often feel, database architectures and creating like relational databases is tricky and the domain of other people. And in many cases, that's right. Like when you get into like a fully complex project with lots of various production needs, that's true. But as a content strategist, I think you can find a way into sanity, and really like I think it's great for your own sort of skills development and career development and just thinking about content. It's super helpful.
Yeah, I think so. We tend to promote Sanity as primarily a developer tool because it requires a bit of coding to get it up and running. But as you say, we made it for like the intersection between technology and liberal arts, like the thing that Steve Jobs spoke about, because we are from an agency background. We have tried to unwrangle messy HTML from this CMS that ends with press, and it's not fun. It's not something that you would want to spend your time on. And we also found the user interfaces of all these CMSs a bit clunky and a lot of buttons and stuff that people didn't seem to use that much. So having this clean way of presenting a content model and actually being able to have a fairly complex, flexible thing. You can make nested object structures and have pretty simple UI coming up sort of out of the box from the code. So we're trying to hit that sweet spot, having developers being able to make the stuff that they need for programming without going without sacrificing the user experience on the editing side of things. It's hard. it's hard to actually do it, but that's what we're trying for. And as you said, the code that you actually write for these schemas isn't that, well, everything is relative, right? It isn't that complex if you sort of want to start getting into coding. Sort of, it's not that long into the journey. That's perhaps a better way to phrase it. But yeah, I thought we actually could take a look at how structured content could look like, and show it's not dirty laundry. It's sort of laundry that has just evolved over time. I don't know. We have we of course use Sanity for Sanity.io. That wasn't always the case actually. I think we were 1 year in, the site being sort of hard coded mostly before actually turning it fully dynamic on top of Sanity. But I can screen share and we can take a look at it and see how it can look, sort of as an example. Let's see. Do you see my screen now?
I do.
Cool. So this is the studio. This is the Sanity Studio. It's an open source single page application. It connects to our hosted data store. It's a real-time data store actually, so we could be in this interface at the same time and write in the same document at the same time, and so on, which is also pretty neat. Yeah, and there's no studios that looks exactly like this, because this is unique for our use case. It sort of have the same, I guess, frame and colors and stuff, but what you see here, the content is, I'm pretty certain no one else has this. And as I mentioned, we didn't have a whiteboard session before setting this up. This has kind of just evolved with the organization. We need pets. Because we have pets and that's fun. So we made pets. No workshops behind this. It's just something we did, right? But perhaps for the documentation part, there's a bit more of thinking about how behind how that actually should work. So we have like documentation articles, and it's like fields, it's text fields, but they're pretty specific. We have like a button for enterprise feature, because that's important for us to actually be able to mark something as an enterprise feature, and not to have it as actually just a string field like free text, because this lets us do design choices in the front end or wherever this ends up. And we have like a rich text editor, which kind of like, this is also custom. It's nobody has this illustration thing that we have, and this like pro tip box, or this. Do we have a gotcha as well? Perhaps not here, but yeah, yeah. What's this, Ronald?
What's this? Sorry.
That was a rhetorical question again. Is this Markdown? Is it HTML? Or is it something else?
Okay, well, yeah, so good question. Well, based on what I know about Sanity, you know, this is what they call a portable text editor, and it is a significant, it's significant. I really genuinely believe that. So basically portable text, hopefully I'll represent this correctly, but it's essentially underlying this presentation layer that we're looking at is a format for storing all this content and annotating it in a way that does not, it doesn't bake HTML into any of these fields or any kind of, language like that. So it basically creates, what we're looking at now is the, essentially the JavaScript version of that content we can see. So I don't know, Knut, feel free to chime in here, but all the various annotations of that rich text that we saw in the previous screen have all been given, you know, unique IDs and specific relationships of parents and child. And so it doesn't assume that content is HTML or anything like that. So it gives you incredible flexibility. And the other thing that it's doing is, when you look at it in that presentation layer, many of those elements are actually references to other parts of the content model or the data structure. So you can embed content and, you know, think about it in a kind of a builder, you know, sort of a layout builder kind of a way. Maybe layout's not the right word, but, you know, you can put your content together in all these different ways, but you're actually not necessarily locking that content to that one place, for example. So does that help?
Yeah, that helps. Yeah, and you can make this all this custom like content types. Like we have like a bunch here, code sandbox embeds and YouTube embeds and yeah, whatnot. And also, what's cool about this is that we let you query this. So with Sanity, you can say, give me all the documentation articles that has more than 2 like code examples, for example. And that's pretty neat to be able to do. Yeah. So that's like kind of the documentation article, exciting stuff. And then we have like this table of contents. And this is perhaps where it's useful to actually also look at the presentation, just to have some useful context for what we are talking about. Let's see if I remember the URL. So table contents, that's this navigation thing here in the front end. So this is actually represented as a document that has an array type. An array type can have like entries, and this is a section entry. So this is how we define this menu. And that's another like principle with structured content. You can also think about how to navigate the content as its own content type that just like frames your other content in a certain way. So we can actually make multiple table of contents if we had like an app, like a Sanity documentation app, when we wanted slightly different way of structuring the navigation. We could like do that now. And
And then
as
you
you
could
mentioned,
reference that. You could reference that table of contents within another document, right? Like or object. You could. There's a kind of
exactly. And
recursivity there that's pretty powerful.
yeah, and this document, it only contains these references to the documentation articles. And the reference is something that you can join. You can like query it in a way that you can like give me this table of contents and all the referenced documentation articles in one like data thing that I can use in an application. So that's kind of where the flexibility and stuff comes out. We also have like the more of the like website content management here. So we have something called routes, and this is where we mostly define the sort of the sitemap, if you want, like the URL structure. So we have a bunch of landing pages and so on, and we can like jump into a route. Here we have the front page with messaging, old hero. This is when you know you are in marketing, and we can like define, should this route appear in the sitemap, like the structured XML thing, that should it like be searchable, should it be indexed by Google? And this is just a data field, and our front end knows how to operate on that, I guess. And it has a reference to something called a page, which is where the content actually lives. And it has some open graph fields, and like if you want to do A/B testing and have like other pages, we can do that as well. And then we have the pages, and here you have sort of a page builder. And page builders is something people tend to like. People are talking a lot about page builders these days. I guess they probably have for a while, but usually it's like having some kind of way to define a list of things. In this page builder, we can have like article, a hero, a feature list, a quote, testimonial, stuff that's pretty specific to our use, but sort of makes out how this page is laid out. And we have tried to do this in a way that isn't too concerned with presentation concerns, redundant, but we also have some of that. Even we have like a knob for like inverting background, because sometimes you just want to like have an easy way to override that, right? But I guess the point here is it would be pretty easy to just ignore this field if you wanted to redesign and deprecate it.
I think
I
that's,
hope.
yeah, I think that's an important distinction, that you have the flexibility to kind of acknowledge, you know, some presentation aspects, but you're also, you know, you can sort of just add those considerations on top of the core of your content, you know, if you think about it that way. In this case, that toggle is like, it's not part of the core
Maybe
of
I've
what you're communicating
hidden
there.
it like on the bottom here, so you don't see it. Yeah. And like coming back to structured content, so we have like, this is a section for starter templates, and we can look at how it actually, I don't remember if I actually have it now on the front. Yeah, so this is kind of the section. So we have some sanity starters. They are like call to actions to this page where you have this starter. You can like make a Gatsby blog in minutes, right, on Netlify. But these starters, this is just a reference to the actual content type of starters. Let's see if I can find them actually. I think they are in the ecosystem. Yeah, here we have them. So these are like a starter. It's structured content. It has some specific fields. It has a GitHub repo. There's some hints. So when you like deploy the starter, we will have like give you a dashboard, and that dashboard has some like a feed of like tutorials and stuff, and that's defined here as a hints package. And there's a technology thing. So this is pretty specific description of what a starter is in our universe, and this can be useful in other contexts if we want to like integrate in a marketplace that could be used in that to like draw the data into that marketplace, for example. So this kind of shows how you can think about structured content in a way, at least
Yeah,
in
so
a
you've
software
got,
as a service.
right. So you've got that the integrity of the starter template as a content type, really, but then because you're referencing it from another layer, you're not really like compromising it. You're just sort of encapsulating that integral stuff. And then if you need to add, for example, the invert toggle, you can do so without, compromising the source.
Exactly. So yeah, is there something you like want to ask me about when we are in this place, in this studio?
I don't know if it's possible to have a look at your, I see that you've got the content model graph.
Yeah, that's one.
Option at the top.
Yeah, so one of our customers, it's actually one of Australia's largest health insurance companies or something. They made this content model graph plugin, and it's pretty cool. It's I'm not loading it. It takes a while because we have quite a content model here. It's like, I don't know, I'm not sure if I recommend this this way of structuring content. Perhaps it works for us, so I guess it works, but yeah, it can be get pretty complex. But yeah, what do you think when you see this?
I think it's pretty wild, actually. I mean, obviously, yeah, it's wild. But it's, as a tool, I find that the content model graph is like especially useful if you're kind of early on, you're doing that kind of modeling work or testing prototypes. You can load the graph, and I just learned this week, is it can just basically, because the studio updates when you're adjusting the schema, the graph will just also render, its update once you change the schema. So I just basically had my graph open in one window, and I was just adjusting and sort of like iterating on my schema in another window. And because I come from a visual background, I'm a visual, have a degree in visual arts, it was just really helpful to kind of, not just be like drawing a schema in, drawing a model in like a Lucid chart or some sort of Illustrator vector software, but I could actually see the relationships playing out graphically in real time as I was making my adjustments to the code. And that was super helpful. This structure looks kind of incredible. I mean, you're obviously doing a lot with it, and I think you're kind of, what do they call it, like self-dog fooding or whatever. So there's probably like a lot of iteration and experimentation going as you go along. But I really like this tool, and I actually approached Cam, the creator of this week, to see if I could contribute to improving it, because I think it could be really helpful.
Yeah, totally. It was so interesting to load this up the first time, and like, whoa, what have you done?
I bet.
But yeah, but it's also interesting to see. So here, for example, we have case studies, and that's where we are like, I think we are doing like the proper structured content approach in a way, because we are tying case studies to use cases and companies and so on. So you can like, from that, make an interesting interesting marketing page thing where you don't have to like map these things manually. It just like comes up from how you like make the connections. So you can like have a case study which have a list of use cases, and if you click the use cases, it will take you to a description of the use case, but also with case studies, and you can tie them to guides to how to actually implement the use case and so on. So you can make this neat like maze of marketing pages without having to actually like do it manually in a way.
That's super powerful. I mean, when we were working on WordPress sites in the agency that I worked from, we wanted to achieve a lot of that kind of I'm not sure what the right kind of reference is, but to make the relationships within the database and then present various kind of view options based on that, be it what kind of product it is, what meta descriptions it may or may not have. And it's it's way easier in Sanity to do that and achieve that and make those relationships, and then sort of present all those different contextual layers based on some people might want to access a particular taxonomy based on the way they think about a product, and other people may come to it from a different way of thinking. So yeah, it's great.
Yeah, and here you also can like view all the fields that the different types have. So here's like the root thing that we just looked at. It has these fields, and you can also see which of those fields are references to other things. So yeah.
Great tool.
This like picture of from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, where Charlie has all this red yarn on his wall. This feels kind of like that.
Yeah, it's a bit of a kind of a conspiracy theorist dream to work with Sanity or something like that. That's great.
Yeah. Cool. Hopefully people has a better idea of what content modeling and structured content is now. But if they want to learn more, if they want to like really dive in and get invested in these things, what should they do?
Well, there's some great books on content modeling. Probably the Bible, at least in my view, is Designing Connected Content by Carrie, Hane, and Mike Atherton. I think Mike Atherton's a Facebook. I'm not sure if he still works there, but he does content work at Facebook. And Carrie Hane runs a company called Tanzan Consulting. That's a great resource. There's a really cool book on information architecture, which relates in some respects to content modeling and content and that sort of work. It's written by a woman named Abby Covert, and the book is called How to Make Sense of Any Mess. So it's really like a book about information architecture and content structuring, but it's written for everybody. So it's not a technical book. Earlier, I mentioned the book Structured Writing by Mark Baker. That's definitely, I'm really enjoying that book, but it's more of it's quite a long book, and it's very methodical, and it just goes from first principles of writing, like right up to sort of what we're dealing with at the moment, a lot of things we've been discussing today. So that's an awesome book. There is I'm not sure, you probably know about it. There's a Norwegian company called NetLife Research who did some great work. They generated this thing called the core model. I think the woman's name, not sure about the pronunciation, Ida Allen or something along those lines.
Ida Allen, she used to be my colleague when I worked at NetLife.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I came across the core model work, and I think that's a great, that's sort of,
it is.
Maybe should have touched on that earlier, but that's a great kind of methodology, I guess, for understanding, getting to a content model early on with stakeholders and people of various interests. So that's awesome. I think the premise, one of the premises sort of behind a lot of what we've talked about today is the sort of create once, publish everywhere paradigm. There's a gentleman called Daniel Jacobson, I think, who did some great work for NPR, which is a national public radio in the United States. And they sort of had that concept. I think they were doing it with XML, I believe, but they had the concept of essentially having this integral content store where the structure of the content made sense unto itself. And then from there, they would publish to wherever they needed to. They'd syndicate their content out to all these various devices and places. And that was written in 2009, I think. It's, it's probably about 10 years old now. But that concept, I think, really paved the way for, what we're talking about today and what Sanity is able to do. There's a great article. I've just got one more here. There's a great article from a woman called Rachel Lovinger on A List Apart about content modeling. So that's another great entry if you're looking for just a kind of a web article into it. There is a content and UX Slack channel, which is pretty awesome. So if you're into content strategy and you want to talk about modeling from that sort of content perspective, that's super helpful. And Knut, I think there's a channel in the Sanity Slack now. Is that right?
Yeah, in fact, there are. It's like it took over a year or 1.5 before we had the idea of should we make a channel of content modeling for our community for the platform for structured content. Yes, that sounds like a good idea. So we did that this week actually. So you all are welcome into that channel to discuss and ask and muse about content modeling and how to actually do this stuff. And you will help them, right?
I'm interested. I mean, I kind of love hanging out in the Sanity Slack. You know, I'm mostly a content guy, so it's interesting. A lot of the kind of, you know, heavy tech stuff goes a bit over my head, but I'm totally down to chat about models. And I started sharing, you know, when that channel opened up, I shared just a public kind of content model as really just like a thought process and to get, you know, inspire others and get feedback. And so I'm hoping to continue doing that, maybe one a week, or, you know, for the next month or two. But yeah, there's lots of interesting questions about content modeling and, you know, working with Sanity. You know, there's, like in any platform, there's gotchas and there's like 100 ways to skin a cat. So, you know, it's interesting to kind of talk about some of the possibilities and get feedback on, you know, how they may or may not impact, you know, developer workflows, and, you know, how they can access particular parts of the content graph and things like that. So yeah, it's good stuff.
Yeah, and I hope that we can get like more people from the teams, not only like the developers. Obviously, I love the developers, but it's cool to see what can come up when you have people from different backgrounds and inklings and so on. So I very much look forward to see how that channel progress.
That's awesome. I'm super excited.
Cool. So yeah, we have been through a lot. Perhaps we can do another video where we go perhaps more hands-on. It would be fun to like live stream content modeling, content modeling 24/7. Yeah, content modeling Twitch. Is there content modeling Twitch yet? There should be, right?
There's uncharted territory there. We'll have to explore.
Yeah, right. But thank you so much for taking the time from like the other side of the planet. Or I'm perhaps on the other side of the planet. I don't know.
I guess
Depends
it depends
on your perspective.
on your perspective. Yeah. Oh, it's been my pleasure. Thank you. Thank you for.
By the way, where can people find you on the internet? By the way,
if you go to avelingray.com, AVELINGRAY.com, you'll find the agency website that I'm a partner in, and yeah, that's a great way to check in. On Twitter, I'm Ronald Aveling, RONALD
yeah, and I guess you will find me in one of these Sanity channels somewhere, and in the links, I will do the pointy thing. There's a links somewhere around here. Yeah, cool. See you in cyberspace, I guess.
Thanks, Knut. Bye.